Welcome to this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I am your host, constitutional attorney here at FFRF, Liz Cavell.
I'm Ryan Jane, another attorney here at FFRF.
And I'm Andrew Seidel, an attorney and FFRF's Director of Strategic Response. Today we're going to be talking about In God We Trust in public schools. These laws are popping up everywhere, but not coincidentally. They are part of a coordinated Christian nationalist agenda, which is not really being reported on.
That's right, and we'll also look at a few dubious moves by the Trump administration, a hotbed always of Christian nationalism, including exempting Bibles from the Chinese tariff war, and a speech by Mike Pence that he gave to the American Legion that was more than a little bit misleading. First, we're going to get to the In God We Trust laws, and as always, if you've got questions, you can ask them in the comments right below, or you can send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. So, In God We Trust in schools and the laws that are popping up all over the country. Ryan, tell us about what we're seeing and what FFRF is doing.
Sure. So over the last couple of years, we've tracked a bunch of these bills that have passed in some states, and you may have seen them. They've been getting some coverage where they're putting the national motto, In God We Trust, up in public schools. In some states, they're becoming mandated. So this is a map that we've created of all the bills and laws that we've tracked of where this is happening. So the black marked states are the ones where it is mandatory. You can see there are 10 of them. The red ones are 11 states where the law explicitly allows public schools to place this religious motto in there. And then the blue are other states where this has been proposed, but the bills have not passed.
Wow.
So this is a lot of states where we're tracking these bills.
Right, and in the black there, just to clarify, these are states where the state legislature has passed a law saying schools in the state, you must display In God We Trust. And some of them say conspicuously, some of them say in every classroom, some of them say in every school. So this is really an alarming kind of piece of indoctrination in our public schools. Andrew, what are we doing on the education side? Tell us about what you've been writing about this problem.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation and kind of a lack of really solid reporting going around on these bills. You know, if you are in Kentucky, you've probably heard about the one in your schools. If you're in Florida, you've heard about it in your schools. The South Dakota law made national news, but nobody's really reporting on the fact that these are all part of a coordinated push, something called Project Blitz. And Project Blitz is this Christian nationalist agenda. Three different groups literally put together a handbook of bills that can be passed. And the end goal, as the end goal of Christian nationalism is to make it so that Christians are this privileged, favored class, and everybody else is second-class citizens. And they start off with these sort of small, ceremonial, symbolic bills, and then they work their way up to essentially saying that Christians have a right to discriminate because they are Christians. And that's really the end goal of Project Blitz. And most of the bills that we've seen proposed in the last 2 years are lifted directly from the Project Blitz playbook.
Yes.
So we've been trying to educate about that.
Yep. And so this is super important. If anyone comes to you and says these are patriotic bills, this is a message just to instill patriotism and unity. It's, I think, really important to remind everybody that this is tied to a series of bills, a series of legislative model bills that are specifically about Christian supremacy. So This is a Christian motto and a Christian bill.
Right. So the In God We Trust in schools bills are phase one of a three-phase plan that is supposed to culminate in basically institutionalizing and legalizing discrimination, mostly against LGBTQ Americans, by religious actors all across the spectrum. So these bills are really laying the groundwork for more and more increasingly harmful bills. So, Andrew, tell us about the rewire pieces.
Well, and we should say too, it's not. You're right that it's not just Christians who are going to get the right to discriminate, but that's what Project Blitz is trying to do. And it's not just LGBT that will be discriminated against. Some
right,
people
of course.
Probably saw over the weekend. They're also looking to discriminate along racial lines. There was that story out of Mississippi that now has made national news about a venue refusing to marry an interracial couple because the Bible says so, which I think they walked back. But anyway.
Although she walked it back saying, I was wrong, the Bible doesn't forbid interracial marriage. That was her correction.
Yeah, so kind of walked it back. So I've been writing a few pieces for Rewire News online, specifically the Religion Dispatches site, and I wanted to really explain to everyone what is going on here. So there's 3 different pieces. The first is the history of the In God We Trust motto, how a secular country got a Christian nationalist motto. It tells the story during 1863 when 3 guys, a preacher, the director of the mint, and the secretary of the treasury, worked to put God, the Christian God, on our coinage and why we ended up with this. The second tells the story of Project Blitz and how this is a coordinated push. And the third talks about why the motto has been upheld by the federal courts, which is essentially they say, look, this motto is not religious. And to me, that is just this rank hypocrisy coming from Christians, allowing a federal court to say that this motto is, which professes to trust in God, is not a religious statement, is absurd.
So the motto, we know, has been challenged in court, as you're alluding to, as a violation of the Establishment Clause. In other words, it's clearly a declaration of religious faith, in God we trust, and that adopting it as our national motto is in itself the government advocating for a religious viewpoint. Courts have rejected that, and what you're talking about is sort of the bogus rationale that's been adopted and that stands today, which is this idea that the motto is sort of existing in this in-between world because it's this ceremonial expression of a shared system of belief, and it's been repeated so often that its religious meaning has been somehow diluted.
Exactly, and I mean, and that is what the courts have said. And I mean, through rote repetition, it's lost any of its legal significance, is one of the lines. And that's just utter nonsense. And you can imagine what the outcry would be if a federal court said this about something else. For instance, if they said it about the Bible verse John 3:16, which is, you see it everywhere. It doesn't lose its religious significance just because it's so often repeated, or praying the rosary, for instance.
Right.
And it's hypocrisy to declare otherwise.
Right. So that's the third piece that you wrote that's up on Religion Dispatches, and these pieces, a lot of people are reading them and seeing them, which is great. They've been on the top 3 pieces on Rewire News. Religion Dispatches trending, part 1, part 2, part 3. There they are.
Yeah, that was really exciting.
That's great because we want people to understand Project Blitz is real. It's happening right under our noses. These laws are being adopted. You saw the map that Ryan was describing. These laws are passing, and phase 1, the groundwork is being laid for a series of Christian nationalist, Christian supremacy laws to be put on the books state by state. So.
And we talked about, how the courts are favorable to In God We Trust, but the courts are also going to get worse and worse because of how many judges the Trump administration is putting in that have this Christian nationalist bent. So if we're relying on the courts to help us stop Project Blitz, that's not the only way we're going to be able to stop it.
Right.
We can't rely on the courts.
Right.
Yeah,
these laws need to be stopped in the state legislatures
Yes.
where they are.
Yeah, we can't trust John Roberts to be the one to stand up to Project Blitz. So you have to convince your legislators that this is a problem.
Right. That's right. Okay, well, let's move on for a minute to the Chinese trade war. Fun favorite topic of the day. We're going to talk about what the Trump administration is focusing on, which is how it's hurting the Bible. So this was done by the administration in the name of religious liberty, which is exempting Bibles from these Chinese tariffs. Andrew, thoughts?
Well, Ryan, you wrote a great letter for Dan and Annie Laurie on this. Do you want to explain to
Right.
people?
Who'd you write to, and what were we trying to express?
Yeah.
I'll get on the religious liberty thing. That's my jam.
Yeah. So we drafted a letter, as you know, to the federal trade representative who is in charge of deciding what products are subject to this tariff and which are not. So this is, of course, this is a cabinet level Trump position. So he's a Trump appointee, and this is really going to be Trump's decision. But
it all stems from this trade war that Trump has sort of thrown us into.
Right. So the idea is we're slapping these tariffs on Chinese imports, meaning if you import something from China, you as the importer are going to have to pay an extra tax on that. And there are certain things that they said should be exempted from the tariff. So it was initially this incredibly broad sweeping tariffs, and it still is, but there are certain things that they said should be exempt. So most of these had some rationality behind it, where they were having to do with health or safety, but then curiously Bibles were on that list as well. So they specifically said you can import Bibles and don't have to worry about tariffs.
Right, and you're seeing on screen now the NPR headline about this series of targeted tariff exemptions: flags in, Bibles out, frog meat delayed, and of course the Bibles there bullet pointed where NPR said the importer's prayers for an exemption were granted. So super hilarious and not funny at all.
So we wrote in it and basically said you should change your policy on this. There is no rational reason to exempt Bibles from this tariff, and not things such as textbooks, for instance. Other books are not exempt.
Right.
So that's the ask that we have gone for, and the only explanation that they have offered is that what we mentioned before, that they cited religious liberty.
Yeah, that's just the most absurd claim. I mean, first of all, the First Amendment says that Congress shall not prohibit the free exercise of religion, and putting a 10% added price onto your Bible is in no way prohibiting your religion. There are more Bibles in the United States than there are human beings, apparently. So there's no danger that people aren't going to get their Bible. This isn't an issue of religious liberty. This is an issue of religious privilege, right? They have gotten this book, they're used to it, and they believe that they have a right to continue to import it at a certain price. That's religious entitlement. It's not religious freedom. And when your religious entitlement is eroded down to the level of equality, that's just equality. Welcome to it.
Right. And it's really hard to imagine that, anyone is actually, never mind all the, small farmers and small business owners and, people who are actually being affected by the Chinese tariffs. This is probably not about all the people who are going to have to, pay more for their Bibles that everyone's buying hard copies of and reading.
You can get for free at any hotel anywhere.
Yeah, see also internet. But it's just about, what the administration kind of can present itself as by saying, and all these tariffs and imports, but Bibles are exempt. And that's what the Trump administration, is standing for, not our Bibles. And leaving aside how hilarious it is that absolutely everything being consumed by Americans is made in China, including our Bibles.
Right.
I think you're right on to make that point. NPR's joke about their prayers were answered is kind of funny, but not at all funny, because it actually shows the influence that Christian nationalists have on this administration and how beholden this administration feels to this very loud, really minority interest group.
Yeah. Right. And look, when I was working on this letter, I looked it up, and it appears that the best estimate that we have is that there are more Bibles in the United States than there are people. They gave the average number per household of people and Bibles was higher.
4.7 Bibles per household and 2.5 people per household.
Yeah, so it's almost double how many people there are, which is just insane. And it shows kind of like what you were saying, Liz, that this is from Christian churches and organizations that want to import the Bible to just spread it everywhere. Right. This is not about people who say, my library lacks this one book, and so I need to order a Bible.
Right. Right. This is making, this is easing no one's economic burden. It's just showboating how privileged Christians are in every possible way under this administration.
That's a great way to say it.
So, yeah, that's cool. Speaking of how privileged Christians are under this administration, the last topic before we take some questions from our audience. Mike Pence gave a ridiculous speech to the American Legion, and we're going to take a look here. Let's see a clip.
You might have heard even today that there's a lawsuit to remove a Bible that was carried in World War II from a missing man table at a VA hospital in New Hampshire. There's a lawsuit underway. It's really no surprise because under the last administration, VA hospitals were removing Bibles and even banning Christmas carols in an effort to be politically correct. But let me be clear. Under this administration, VA hospitals will not be religion-free zones. We will always respect the freedom of religion of every veteran of every faith. And my message to the New Hampshire VA hospital is the Bible stays.
Such a compelling speaker. Yeah. Mike Pence doing what Mike Pence does, which is pandering to Christians. And of course, there's a lot to unpack there. We're going to do a little fact checking on that story. He's talking about an issue that arose in a New Hampshire VA hospital regarding this missing man table. So let's just kind of briefly talk about, it's up on the screen here. Describe what's the missing man table? What's he talking about?
So this is a table that's meant to honor POWs and MIAs and to honor their memory, pointing out that we remember you and we remember your sacrifice. And they're popping up all over the country, but they're also being tainted with religion all over the country. And the Military Religious Freedom Foundation brought a lawsuit against this particular display because they included a Bible in it. And there's a couple things wrong with what Penn said. First of all, this is no longer up to the administration. The administration doesn't have a say because a federal court is now going to adjudicate this issue. So he's wrong there. And the second thing is he really misrepresented that lawsuit. It was actually brought by a, quote, devout Christian. The plaintiff in that lawsuit claims to be a devout Christian who's doing this because he doesn't want religion forced on his military brothers and sisters, which is it's a very honorable reason to bring a lawsuit. And if you listen to Pence, he's making it seem out like this anti-religion thing when really it's a pro-Constitution thing.
Yeah, well, there's a strong history of that in state church cases where the plaintiff is just either not the majority religion or they just don't want their government imposing religion, but it always gets twisted into this, the atheists are doing it. Another thing is the original display of that POW MIA table didn't even include a Bible. It was added later. So it was the same for that particular display that was challenged in that lawsuit.
Yeah, it's not just not just that particular POW MIA display, but all POW MIA displays like this didn't have the Bible originally.
Right. Yep. And another thing too is he went with the thanks Obama defense, saying that this is Obama's fault, and the policy change actually happened under George W. Bush's watch.
Yeah, correct? In 2008. Yeah, I mean, Pence right here is defending Christian privilege. He's not defending religious liberty. It's incredibly frustrating to watch how there's all this subtle disinformation, and then there's these sort of outright lies.
Right.
And one of them is what Ryan just mentioned, that this is not a Obama policy that he is mentioning. This is actually something that his party did.
Right.
It really what it did was come from this fake Todd Starnes article that is not real. Todd Starnes. Well, first of all, let's stop for 1 second because everybody needs to know Todd Starnes is not a journalist.
Right. Speaking of misinformation,
I mean he's one of the worst purveyors of the Christian persecution complex out there. He writes these inflated. He's written a whole inflated book about it. He does not care about facts. He does not care about reality. He cares about fear mongering. Yeah, that is all his goal is.
So this is more of a blog than an article.
Yeah.
American Legion outraged over VA Christmas censorship, and so this is kind of one of the roots of the misinformation about
Yeah, and he's Mike Pence is repeating something that Snopes actually debunked in 2015.
Right, and that blog being from 2013.
Yeah. So and if you follow there's another policy that Pence mentioned. He talked about the Christmas carolers. That policy, that was actually a case out of Georgia where the VA asked a high school that was coming in to sing, "Hey, if you're going to sing sectarian Christian songs, we'd like you to do that in private where veterans can attend rather than singing them in public spaces. We'd like you to limit it to really inclusive songs in the public spaces. Right. You can absolutely sing those other songs, just we're going to do it in a private area where people can attend and it's not being forced on everybody else." And of course, in their minds, this is just a gross violation of religious liberty to ensure that the machinery of the state is not being used to impose Christianity on others.
Right, and I mean, and there you can hear it just in the delivery compared to what he's actually talking about. Just the doublespeak of, podium pounding and saying this administration is going to protect the religious liberty of everybody, no matter what religion, by putting a Christian Bible on every table, everywhere, honoring, POWs and MIAs. It's just like, it's just beyond alternative facts. It's just, I'm telling you one thing and the actual situation is something else. It's just like this inability to see that protecting the religious liberty of everybody, of every religion, actually means religious neutrality by the military and by the U.S. government. It doesn't mean not removing Christian symbols from public property.
Yeah, you can really see that when he's talking about the religion-free zones.
Right.
That's the quintessential. He does not understand what true religious liberty is. He does not get that the freedom of religion can only be protected when a government is free from religion. He sees the government as a means to impose his religion on everybody else.
Yeah, and he sees a neutral space as a religion-free zone, being excessive political correctness, and so it's the same thing with the Bible tariffs we were talking about before, where if you have to play by the same rules as everyone else for your Bibles, that's an attack on religious liberty, and you can count on it that once we start to get state legislators to remove "In God We Trust" mandatory laws from public schools, they're going to say that's an attack on Christianity too.
Right.
Yeah, I mean they just have a fundamental misunderstanding of religion, and that's actually not fair. It's not a misunderstanding. They're deliberately warping what the meaning of religious liberty and they're weaponizing religious liberty on purpose.
That's right. Well, on that note, let's take some questions. We are getting a couple questions coming in here, so here we go. Oh, geez. Is there any legal push in the works to get "In God We Trust" off of the currency? So we alluded a little bit before to challenges that have already been brought against the motto, and one of the main sort of vehicles for that has been challenges to "In God We Trust" being on the currency.
And Andrew's second Rewire piece, right, is the one that addresses this point too. So if you haven't already tabbed those up, go ahead and do it so you can learn a little bit more that way. Yeah,
I would definitely check that article out. It really does go into the legality of this backwards and forwards. I quote a number of court cases on it. I quote the judges in these cases. It's frustrating, but I don't think we cannot rely on courts to do this for us. I absolutely think that in our lifetime, in my lifetime, that is no longer going to be our national motto. "In God We Trust" will be gone. It will be off our money. But it is not going to happen in the courts, and we should not wait for the courts to solve this problem for us.
And I'll also say that "In God We Trust" in public schools, to my knowledge, has never been considered by a federal appellate court. A couple district courts have considered it, and so that is technically an open battle, but again, you don't want John Roberts to be making the call on this. You can't trust the Supreme Court right now.
Well, kind of on that note, Mary McConnell asking, how do I go about filing an official complaint about the required posting of a sign "In God We Trust" now prominently displayed on the entry window of our public school office? So, of course, because these laws are going into effect in so many states, we're getting a lot of complaints from parents in these school districts who, are arriving at school again in the new school year to see these just gross, huge "In God We Trust" signs emblazoned above the door of the elementary school or in the front office or wherever. So you can report that to FFRF. You can go to our website, ffrf.org, fill out our intake form and let us know where it is, where you are, who, what, when, where.
Yeah. I think people should complain to their school board.
Right.
They should complain to their elected officials at every different level. They should write letters to the editor for their local papers and their local media outlets. The key here is to not be quiet and to not take this lying down. And when you're reporting it to FFRF, there's probably not a lot we're going to do about that individual display unless something else is going on. Like we're looking for an opportunity where a student is being bullied because this display is up, or teachers are referring to this display to say that they're able to teach creationism or some nonsense like that. We're looking for the display plus.
Yeah, and that's all the more reason to bring it up to school administration and the school board, because if you go to a school board meeting and you say, I don't think that this should be displayed, especially if you're in a state where it's not mandatory, or maybe it is, but they have it gigantic, and you say, can we have a more reasonable thing that complies with the law but doesn't hit everyone over the head with it? And if they come back and say, sorry, this is a Christian nation, and if you're not a Christian, get out of here, then suddenly this is now actionable.
Right. And so I think the takeaway is try to, if you can, be vocal in your community. These are laws at the state level, so your state legislators are the ones passing and imposing these laws on you and your children's public schools. And so those are the people that need to hear from you, and the school boards that represent you and the administrators.
And look, something we haven't really talked about is this is absolutely exclusionary. This is saying to every kid who goes into that school, like, this is a school that believes in God. And a huge chunk of kids these days do not believe in God. They are not religious. You're talking about like more than a third of kids are not religious. And so what the government is doing, what these state legislators are doing, is they are dividing children along religious lines, which is wildly unacceptable. And that is the argument that we should be making to these public officials and in the papers and shouting from the rooftops. And
even some believers too, like Orthodox Jews don't write out God that way, for instance, so this is obviously not referring to their God, so this is, it's extremely exclusionary.
Right. Okay, so Vicky here asks, where in the Constitution does it say "In God We Trust" is our national motto? Haha. It doesn't. So you can read Andrew's pieces on religion dispatches at Rewire, but just briefly, where did we get our national motto?
It popped up for the first time during the Civil War in 1863. And I do tell the story, and I tell the Rewire news piece is an abbreviated version of the story that I tell in The Founding Myth, the book that I just wrote about Christian nationalism and all the myths surrounding Christian nationalism. It didn't become our motto until the 1950s. But it is in the U.S. Code that "In God We Trust" shall be the national motto.
Right, meaning it's a statute that was passed by the United States Congress.
Yeah, which means that all that has to happen for it to go away is Congress to repeal that statute, and then the various regulations mandating that it's on the currency.
Right.
And they could adopt, for instance, "E pluribus unum." They wouldn't even have to repeal the statute. They could amend the statute so it says "E pluribus unum" shall be the national motto.
Right.
And actually, that would be really nice, because a lot of these state statutes say the national motto.
Yeah.
So if you change it at a national level, the states are immediately going to have to change their displays.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice fix.
Okay, so
Put it on the list.
Yeah.
Project Blitz is an interesting name, like the Blitz of London in World War II.
Right. Yes.
And who is responsible for picking that name? That's a great question. Who's behind Project Blitz?
Yeah, so Project Blitz is the name that these groups agreed on. There's two primary groups: the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, which is the private nonprofit associated with the Congressional Prayer Caucus. Randy Forbes was the representative who started the Congressional Prayer Caucus. He got bounced out of Congress and started, I think he started the nonprofit before that. But the nonprofit really picked up and ran with this getting God into government idea. And he teamed up with Wall Builders, which is David Barton's outfit. If you don't know David Barton, congratulations, your life is better than everybody else who does know it. He's this terrible Christian propagandist who parades around as though he's an historian. He's not. His degree is from, I think, from Oral Roberts University in Christian education, which to me means indoctrination when you're talking about a degree from there. Anyway, those two, his group, Wall Builders, and the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, are the two primary groups who are in charge of Project Blitz and put together this handbook. And they chose the name Project Blitz, and I agree that it is a very interesting choice of name, and it definitely has those German connotations to it.
Yeah, well, and it also shows the intent of the project, which is to very suddenly throw all of this onto all the state legislatures. So it's like before you know what hit you, this is already in all 50 states. That's their goal.
Supremacy and suddenness. Those are the two kind of words that come to mind when you're talking about the Blitz.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not known for his accurate historical knowledge. David Barton probably got it from football because Jesus loves football.
Right.
So one more question. This is just fun, has nothing to do with anything. Have you all watched The Family on Netflix yet? If so, what do you think about it? I know you haven't and I haven't. Ryan?
I wished I could say I have. I've seen the first few episodes and it's very compelling, and I will be watching the rest.
As will I.
I read Jeff's book like when it came out, like in 2010.
Jeff Charlotte, on whose book the series is based. It's a docuseries about sort of the not so secret, but exposed Christian influence on our government officials.
And I've been dying to watch it. Our travel schedule's just been so insane lately that we haven't had time to sit down and watch anything. Though my sister did force me to watch The Great British Bake Off or whatever that show's called, and I kind of got hooked on that one.
That's a fair excuse.
A lot less scary, a much more fun way to unwind. And so before we sign off today, we wanted to encourage everyone to go and watch the season premiere of Free Thought Matters. That is FFRF's TV talk show program. Annie Laurie Gaylor and Andrew interviewed Representative Jared Huffman of California. He is a co-founder of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and he is the only, as of right now, openly non-religious member of Congress. So it's a really refreshing interview. You don't hear politicians talk like Representative Huffman. So
it was really cool.
Yeah. So watch it. We're going to check out a short clip here.
There is this other goal of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and that's to work to base policy on science. And there seems to be this intimate tie, and you've spoken about it, between science and secularism and state-church separation.
It's very important, and that's why, frankly, we've got a couple of scientists that are part of the Free Thought Caucus. We're constantly invited to make policy based on things other than science and reason and facts. Climate change is, maybe the greatest example of this. Honestly, this is no exaggeration. I have colleagues across the aisle who just can't get their head around why we would make policy based on future generations to come when, the rapture is probably just around the corner. They literally think that way and they talk that way. Pretty scary stuff. You see it in foreign policy all the time. To some extent, the fervent militaristic support of Israel, the constant push for war in the Middle East. Some of my colleagues advance these ideas because they want to bring on the end of days and a great glorious Armageddon that will hasten the coming of the Messiah. This is dangerous, crazy stuff, and it belongs nowhere in our public policy.
It is so awesome to hear a representative talk like this. This aired on Sunday night. If you were fortunate enough to be in Chicago, Denver, Houston, LA, Madison, Minneapolis, New York, Phoenix, Portland, Sacramento, Seattle, or Washington, you could see this when it airs. It's actually up on our YouTube channel and Facebook right now. I'd really encourage everybody to go watch the entire thing. It was a fascinating interview, and it really is so refreshing is the right word. You don't hear politicians talk like this. And I will also say that the right-wing media has picked this up. He was on this. They're playing clips on Fox News now. So go find Representative Huffman on Twitter and on Facebook and give him a little love, because he's going to be hearing it from the other side. And we don't want him to go away with a ton of hate mail. We'd like for him to hear some thank yous, I think.
Right. So check out Free Thought Matters, and it's our weekly talk show. We have lots of cool guests. You can.
Yeah, that was the season premiere for this year. It was great.
Yeah. So keep up with Free Thought Matters, and that's all for Ask an Atheist today. One way you can help FFRF is by contacting government officials who violate the law. So if you want to receive FFRF action alerts on your smartphone, text FFRF to 52886. Data rates may apply. Again, that's FFRF. Text it to 52886. And we invite you to become a member of FFRF. Please help us in our vital work to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about non-theism. Visit our webpage at ffrf.org, or you can phone us at 1-800-335-4021. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.